thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Welcome to Boundary Encounters. It's lovely to see you all sat in our community seating that was sort of created for this particular show. It's lovely that you all each had some time to look at the work in the upper galleries. We're going to move now into an in-conversation with our commissioned artists, with Valeria Simwi-Amani, Julie Freeman, Harold Offe, and Deborah Pill. Each artist was invited to create some new work for Boundary Encounters, which you've just had some time with in the upper gallery. A really wonderful opportunity to hear more about each commission. We're going to invite questions as well, so everybody feel free to join in with the conversation. We'll have to pass the mic round a little bit, and I think we've probably got some questions for each other too as well as part of the project. But just as a little bit of an introduction, Boundary Encounters is our summer programme. It's very much a collaborative project, so throughout the summer we're inviting an alternative use of our gallery space. We're really keen to have our projects and workshops and events throughout the galleries throughout the summer, and we invited artists to create new work. We have creatives in residence throughout this summer programme as well. We've got a young people's project starting next week and lots of workshops and events that you can take part in too. So please do take a programme guide with you, and we welcome you to come back many, many times and kind of spend time with us here in the galleries. So I'd like to take just a moment just to introduce everybody, and if okay with you all, just to say a little bit about your work and how you've responded to the Boundary Encounters theme. Valerie, would you like to go first?
I don't know why I sat next to you. Well, thank you, Sarah. And I guess the first person I had contact with was Jess Robertson, who's back there in black. And we were speaking about, I think our conversation started talking about communities of care, about feminism, and about maybe encounters that wouldn't normally feel like they would have a big impact, but they do. So we started talking about WhatsApp groups and how WhatsApp groups you can form these bonds and friendships online, sometimes with people that you haven't met before. And I mean, at that time when we started talking, I had just joined a financial advice WhatsApp group for women, and it was very particular. But what I liked about this group was that, a lot of the people were strangers. There's over 30 women in this group, but people started asking about relationship advice. It started becoming very intimate very quickly, and I just thought it was really amazing, the space of care that this WhatsApp group had created, and it's made me think about research I had done in the Black Cultural Archives with a journal called the OWAD Journals, which stands for the Organization for Women of African and Asian Descent, which was started in 1978. It no longer exists, but these journals were basically a place for women to share information about a lot of migrants who had come into the country, about the rights that they had. They had comic strips in them. They had poetry written by members of the community. So it's all this kind of different content, which I thought was just really impressive and amazing. And how do we create these communities right now? And when I thought about the theme of Boundary Encounters, I wanted to create this space where people could have an encounter with text, with video, with poetry that would make them think about their friendships and their communities of care. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you, Valerie. Julie, would you like to talk about another present?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think when Sarah first approached me, I do a lot of work with data, so she came to me and was interested in asking me to make a sonic work, a sound-based work that worked with the data from the archives. And so in our conversations, we ended up going through some of the archives here, and after seeing the space and understanding more about Valerie's work and Harold's work, and at that time didn't know Deborah was in it, but would have been you as well then. And it became clear to me that the usual sort of work I make would be a big soundscape in the space wouldn't work because it'd be too intrusive on the other works. Something that was a digital animation wouldn't work because it would need dark space, and this was much more about light and openness. And so I became more to think about materials and the idea of how do you sort of breach boundaries of listening to sound. How can you begin to feel sound? How can you embody sound in something that people could maybe touch? And that would be kind of looking at how, when you go to a gallery, you're not supposed to be touching objects. How could we ask people to actively touch objects? And I like the idea of that in the context of the curatorial sort of premise. And so, yeah, Another Present came out of that. It's a really personal work, but it's also a work that I feel is quite altruistic. Not only does it give people a sense to really get hold of my work, but it also encompasses other sound artists that were discovered in the archives. And I wanted to envelop particularly female sound artists who are a minority in the sound art field. So I think including them in my work was an act of generosity on their part, because they allowed me to reconfigure the format of their work, which is quite a big deal, but also for me to say this is a vessel, this is an open vessel for other people to put their creative ideas into. And then one of the works has also got synthesized sounds that works very directly with data from the archives. It was what particularly interested me was the sort of the idea of how people identify themselves as often female attendees. Still, galleries are about maybe 65 to 70% female audiences, and yet the majority of the artists, it's previous maybe to this decade, has been predominantly males. So there's an interesting sort of dynamic in that I started to sort of dig into a little bit. But so this work is sort of a new direction for me, and I'm really pleased that I've had the chance to explore it.
Lovely, thank you. And Julie, would you just mention just briefly as well, just about the female artists, which 3 female artists are in one of the pieces as well?
Yeah, so there's Sarah Kenchington's work, and she was commissioned previously, you recognise her, and she did a piece of work where she made a house into a musical instrument that people could play. So really, her work embodied the house, and then my work is embodying her work that was, but this is quite meta. There's also Anne Lilagard, her sound piece, which is follows a very sort of domestic, intimate soundscape of someone going about their daily lives. And then also Hannah Rickards, she did a piece of work called Thunder, which is amazing. She took a thunderclap that was about 7 or 8 seconds long. She slowed it down to 7 minutes. She got a composer to write a score for it, had musicians create the score, and then compressed that back into 8 seconds. So it's a sort of human-generated thunderclap. And you can listen to the score and the thunderclap through the taller piece in the gallery. So very sort of, works that really akin to how I work. But I mean, really, really nice to include them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I hope a few people maybe recognise some of those artists that have been in our programme historically and been in this gallery space. So really lovely to bring them back into this particular show. Thank you, Julie. Harold, over to you, please, to tell us a little bit about your work Pavilion.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Great to be here. My work Pavilion, again, emerges from this really amazing invitation to take part in the show, and I think I really appreciate the conversations with Holly and Sarah. I think maybe something that's not always kind of visible is the kind of, it took me a long time to kind of come to this point, and I think this way of working, which has been very generous in terms of really appreciate the conversations with Holly and Sarah, because I think when you get an amazing invitation that's quite open, it can be very difficult to sort of find a sort of purchase and anchor. But one of the important starting points, I think, was that my commission was going to be linked to the idea of doing a residency and working with a group of young people, and that's going to start on Monday, by the way. We haven't started yet. So immediately I was thinking about this thing that's quite important for me as an artist, which is often facilitating. What does it mean to facilitate and create the conditions for my own learning, and also these encounters with other people's learning? And again, that notion of the encounter is something that I'm very interested in, and it's obviously foregrounded in the exhibition title. But it took me a long time to really settle on something that would, what's going to be the context for that? What might we do? What's this residency going to do? So really it was going through my own kind of archives and really thinking about experiences, and thinking about something I've been using quite a lot is leaning into design and craft processes and methodologies. I'm not a designer, I'm not a craftsperson, but I'm often really interested in how those processes of making really frame learning and often allow for collective learning. And that was something I was interested in. And so what I produced, the pavilion itself, references very specifically an amazing Brazilian architect called Lina Bobardi, who's a modernist architect, mid-century, originally Italian, but emigrated to Brazil. And a personal encounter that I had with her work over 15 years ago when I did an amazing residency in Brazil, and in Sao Paulo, she created this art centre, arts and leisure centre for a working class community. It's called SESEC Pompeii, if anyone wants to check it out. It's a brutalist kind of sort of building structure, but what I was really interested in was her real sort of like genuine attempt to kind of facilitate and situate like arts and leisure. There's like a swimming pool, there's sports facilities, there's like space for like festivals and exhibitions, display, but her approach to it is kind of total. So she designed stools and furniture for people to use, as well as the kind of building structures and the kind of architectural language. So I was again thinking about this kind of architect designer facilitating and really thinking specifically about, you know, this quite marginalized working class community that didn't have these like amazing arts and cultural facilities. So the pavilion is partly referencing and echoing that her, but also then thinking about a space within the gallery. So yeah, the pavilion is going to have this evolving use. So over the course of next week, I'm going to be working with this group of young people who are from all over Oxfordshire, and we'll be working with a group of local designers and makers. So there's Daisy and Andrew, who have a design studio called Lula James, and then there's Hattie Speed, who's also known as This Girl Designs, or This Girl Makes, This Girl Makes, get that right, who also have local connections, studios in Oxford. And we'll be making together. That's something for me that's really important, is that kind of levelling. And I've invited the young people, the young artists, to make a seat for the table that's already situated. So we're going to be thinking about who specifically we might be making these individual seats for, but also the opportunity through that process of making to think about what they might want to say about the making, design, decoration. So again, it's a way of framing a conversation that will evolve over that week of us being in the same space, in the gallery, and creating something that sits in the space. I feel like I've been talking for a long time.
That's all, that was lovely, thank you.
Deb.
It's fine, Harold, take as long as you want.
No, as the only man, I don't want to be doing, taking 2 months, but yeah.
Not at all. That was wonderful. Thank you very much, Harold. There's a lovely connection with furniture, though, that I think, Deb, you can speak to with your commission too.
Yeah, I mean, listening to everyone, there's a thread, there's a connection that we're all sort of like looking for, and it's those encounters and those conversations. And Harold's got this circular table, and we both talk about not having any hierarchy around a table. And table talk is exactly that. I'm lucky enough to facilitate in the creative space here at Modern Art, and the conversations I have with people and the observations I make have been embedded in the cork, which is, the table is made of cork, but the work as well. It was important to me to embed some of those conversations, make them real rather than, transitory and fleeting. Wanted to embed them. So, and cork is one of those lovely materials that actually absorbs sound. So again, it was quite a nice way of tying everything in. But yeah, the conversations we have in the building, I don't think people quite realise how important they are. They affect all of us, and there's also a piece where I'm going to be writing en cork with architectural tracing paper and tissue to leave an imprint. And again, it affects the building, especially like with all the work we're going to be having done in the next year. To have people's opinions, their memories of how things have been, it's important, those invisible conversations.
Lovely, thank you, Deb. One thing that I've noticed that's particularly rich across each of your commissions is that in this open invitation to respond and create some work for the project, you've each brought more people into the space, each of you have. And we gave ourselves a little bit of a framework for this project. We wanted to look at what it would mean to be part of a communities of practice, which is something that we're interested in from an educational point of view with some of our programme activity. But I just wonder if you've maybe each thought a little bit about, what that sort of concept means to you, sort of to be part of a communities of practice, or so what the importance of how we learn from each other. I don't know if anybody wants to start with that.
Yeah, I'd like to. Jimmy, for me, working in the creative space, it's the conversations I've had. I've not only tried to encourage other people to take part or understand an exhibition a little bit better, but those conversations have helped to consolidate my practice. I hadn't realised how socially engaged my practice was going to be.
Absolutely, and you talk a lot, Deb, about how conversation has just become that real kind of key point with your practice that you're realising now.
Yeah, before I started this art journey, I was a hairdresser for about 35 years, so conversation was very much part of my daily life, and I definitely wanted to sort of leave one life behind and start another. But I've come to realise that I can't. It's part of who I am, and yeah, I just like to chat and make people feel comfortable. So again, you're looking at your own archive, and that's something I've discovered about myself through this as well.
Wonderfully, thank you.
Yeah, I think that I was remembering one of our earlier calls. I think we were talking about the idea of soft collaboration. And that was interesting to me because it's not a sort of predefined collaboration or intentional. It's just something that emerges through conversations or through sort of you and Holly and Jess as sort of curatorial mediators between the artists, that we've somehow managed to all have quite a strong thread between our works without having, individual conversations. I've spoken to Valerie, but didn't speak to you directly on a sort of exchange like that, nor you, Deborah. And so that's interesting that sort of you managed to make that happen. Your framework did manage to make that happen. For me, working with the other artists, the sound artists, was just a joy, because I was like, I don't know, will they? I felt really humbled actually by that. Will they let me use their work? And they were so generous in letting me do that. And it's like handling, even though it's sound, it's like handling someone else's artwork. You have to be gentle with it and delicate. I had to reconfigure it and make it into a longer composition. I'm putting them side by side. There's a responsibility that comes with that. I felt quite privileged. Yeah, it's nice to have
I have to say, I felt a bit like that with the conversations. I didn't want people to feel that I'd betrayed them, so I felt it was quite a sensitive thing as well. Yeah, those conversations were delicate.
And if I can just jump in there, I had a similar conversation with Jess about this, about how do you present these conversations but in a way that protects someone's identity, someone's personal life. And even just considering the space and knowing that there are other artists in the space, you kind of have to be considerate of the space as well, and co-creating with the curators, with the technical team, and knowing that, I mean, some of the things I couldn't make, like the bench, I couldn't have made without Scott and Andy, and just having that support and knowing that someone else's hand has to come into this to make it a possibility, a reality. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, Harold, any sort of thoughts on the communities of practice concept? Because I know when you were thinking about, you know, where is a space for practice as well, I know that was something that you were thinking about a lot. You know, that can just be sort of a solitary space, you know, is it a room with everybody in? Maybe talk a little bit more about that for your own process.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think the dynamics of space and hosting space and holding space and what that sort of generates is always something that I'm kind of concerned with, particularly when working with like institutions. I think maybe this is tangential, but something that I think has been really amazing about this whole process is, and I think it's pretty unique in my career. I've sort of been practicing for about 25 years, and as an artist, I sort of work, like I work in lots of learning contexts, so with like, so I know this is communities, practices, and participation. This department's not called learning, but education, you know, those things that are maybe outside of what's traditionally like the exhibitions and displays, and like having navigated those different sides of institutions, there's a lot of kind of politics and hierarchies that sort of come with that, which I think are sort of problematic. But I think for me what's really important and radical about this show is that's because often I think those processes where communities practice and engage with other artists is this really special space of co-learning. Like, I mean, the reason I work in kind of like community learning context is because I'm an artist because I want to learn. It's all about and sharing that learning, and I learn through the socialization and dialogue and conversations. And that's a really important part of institutions like these galleries. For me, that's the bit that's contemporary because it's live and it's contested. And as an artist, like, although I have some agency, it's contested because I'm having to be in dialogue and maybe I'm facilitating other people's. So there's a kind of radicality in that. And that happens at most publicly funded institutions. Sorry, too close to the mic. And it isn't necessarily always visible, or the critical dialogue around those practices isn't necessarily always given a kind of platform. And I think what's really great and radical about this is to recognise that this has been happening here since, 1966? Like, these practices, these conversations that have embedded artists being in conversation with communities, co-making, co-learning. And it's been given a platform here. And I really, really have to thank the gallery, everyone from Paul down, Sarah, Holly, Jessie, you know, all the curatorial team, Scott and Andy, everyone. It's quite radical, it's rare. This doesn't, you know. And I really just want to kind of recognise that. And that is also about creating space, because I feel something to recognise is this is not a traditional exhibition in the sense that you may be arriving and the work is made through your encounters with it. It's going to be generative. I think I'm privileged to be showing with these artists because they're also creating works that are going to be, they're generous, but they're also generative, and they're evolving, and they're going to evolve through your encounters. And it's a show that you need to come back, maybe several times, to engage with the works and see how it transforms and evolves. And that's another radical model. You know, it's not, okay, I came, I saw the show, saw that image, and then left. So I think, I'm sort of just aware of, even before I'm thinking about what I did with trying to create space, there's something, that work which is often invisible. And again, you know, Sarah, the work that you do, and Holly does, and a lot of the team here does, is often invisible, like in terms of intellectual discourse, cultural discourse. So I think I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that. Sorry, I've gone off on a tangent.
Can I just comment on that, because I think it's really interesting, this idea that a traditional art exhibition is produced, it's open, and it's fixed in the moment in time. And actually, I think we all work with not just time-based media work, but time-based work that constantly pushes forward. So there's nothing static about it. It's not just, I've installed it, it's done, let's go off and do something else. There's this constant thing, and that is what, for me particularly in my practice, I'm interested in nature and the environment and how we live and move forward. And there's no stopping that, this sense of time. So it makes sense that art and the art world should be following that through, should be carrying this notion of evolution and evolving and changing, rather than the exhibition being there, done. You know, that's not interesting, that's not how we live or how we are. So I think that's really, I like that.
Yeah, it's a lovely way to bring, we're very interested in seeing how the space is going to change over the next couple of months. And like Harold says, that invitation is very much for people to come back to the space and to be part of this project with us. It's a moment where we as a team want to learn. We've brought some of our archive material out into the space. We want to reflect on the really rich programme history that the gallery has had before us, before we were a programme team of colleagues working together. There's some really wonderful projects, and I'm sure that some of you might actually know about some of those projects, or I mean, I can even see Helen here, who actually led some of our projects as well in the gallery. So it's all of those relationships that we really want to kind of acknowledge, I think, for this particular project as well. And it's really wonderful to have that moment in the gallery space where we can encourage people to come and spend time with us, and that we can use these moments to really learn from each other, and then maybe see how our programme will change and evolve moving forward as well. We're very keen to open up the floor for conversation and questions from you all too, in this true participatory context that is our Boundary Encounters project. Is there anybody that has any questions for our artists? Yeah, Lily? Okay, we're going to pass mics round. A little bit of warning, they're on wires.
I might take the long one, sorry. Then I can roam all the way around.
Sure. Absolutely. Oh, I'm very sorry.
Hi. That was much louder than I thought. Just carrying on from what you were just discussing about the evolution and changes, how is modern art going to capture those? Have you got something in mind on how you're actually capturing these changes as they go along during this period of time?
For this particular project?
Yes.
Yes, so we've got a full programme of activity. We've obviously invited our wonderful artists here who have been extremely generous with the idea of their work, having those kind of interactions where you can connect with everything in the upper gallery. We've got a range of projects and activities. We've also got some really wonderful artists who are going to be in residence in the gallery space as well throughout the summer. So Kelly, I think you're here this evening as well. So we've got quite a few of us joining us this evening. Really excited to see how artists can come into the space and develop their practice with us, and just do a lot of listening to that as well and seeing what ideas will emerge. I think it's saying that, you know, within space, if we allow things to emerge and we trust what that process is, we can be very open with that, and then we can ask questions each day really as a team by just simply spending time in the space. But lots of our workshops and projects are also kind of geared up for these moments of reflection. So that might be looking a little bit at archive material. For example, along the wall here, you'll see we've invited local community centres to take part in this project with us. And that's recognising how vital their space is too. So many of these spaces that were built, you know, with a real push from the national government after the Second World War to kind of get these spaces built for communities. We wanted to look a little bit at their material and learn from them and learn with them too. So we've got 6 community centres that are part of this project that will be coming back and kind of telling us a little bit about how they operate in the city. And we've also got a lot of different workshops. We're also using this space, the wall space that you can see around you here, is to show some processes that we're underway with the redesign of our gallery space too. So we've got artist Emma Hart, who's designing a new cafe for us that will be down in the basement space. And this wonderful wall work that you've got here is from David Cohen Architects, who is the practice that we're working with to transform our ground floor space. And again, that was informed by a community consultation that we did in 2019. So we just continually find these ways to invite people to tell us what they think, what we're doing well, what we could do better. But yeah, I don't want to distract a little bit too much from the commissions that we've got in the space.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed looking at all of your works earlier, and one of the things that really struck me about all of them was that there was a real playfulness to them. And so I guess my question is whether that was kind of something that was like front of mind and very consciously done in order to make your work sort of feel, playful, inviting and unintimidating, and to sort of create those encounters, or whether it was more like in the sort of subconscious, something that is that sort of something that's always in your practice, sort of running through it.
For me, it started with being in the creative space. Most people seem to love cutting and sticking and gluing things down, so my work started off enlarging the text and making a collage from the text. So playful to begin with, and then it went through to laser cutting. So playful to begin with.
Okay, I'll go. I think one of the first conversations that we all had was, how do you make an exhibition space that people know they can touch things? And I think we've all experienced being in a space where you walk in, it's quite intimidating, it's quite cold. You have like the gallery assistant like behind a high desk, and you're just like, should I not be in this space, So I think personally it was important for me to have it kind of soft, and that's why I chose like fabrics that make it feel kind of domestic, kind of things that you would experience in your everyday life. And I'd read an article by the White Pube about going into gallery spaces with no seating, and like, where do you sit, and people who have different access needs. So it was clear, like, let's just have a place to sit. And it's so nice that Harold is also creating this, project that they're going to be creating a seating area together. And I think, all of us had this intention of wanting people to touch things, to open things. The book is an invitation, so the artwork is completed by the audience, by how they contribute to the book in whatever way that they want to. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's, the touch thing is also the idea of like post-pandemic, when we're all so far and not touching and not sharing surfaces, and really nice and felt really important to make something where people were not just asked to touch, but actually to get the best out of your encounter, to get the best of it, you get up close and really sort of get in there, even with the plastic. And and also, you just mentioned the White Pube. If anyone doesn't know them, check them out. Their reviews and their comments on the art world are just mint. So I love them.
Oh gosh, I was sort of holding back because I'm in my middle-age dotage of sort of the politics of play. I'm really, really very passionate about like play, and it's something that I think is very taken for granted. And when I say the politics of that, I think, sort of human development, us as individuals and as how we socialise, is foregrounded through play. But that has to be facilitated, and I'm increasingly kind of aware of the lack of that facilitation. And I think a lot of my work is about advocating like the need for play, but also recognising it as something that is not just for children, it's intergenerational, it's lifelong. In fact, I think we need more spaces for intergenerational play, like through different ages and experiences, sharing communally and playing together. And again, play is intrinsically linked to learning and our development, It's super fundamental, but again, it's something that I think is often considered, not important, not a priority. If we're talking about the kind of quality of our lives, then play is fundamental to that, and it's part of the creative process. So I just want to kind of throw in there like the politics of it, because I think it's really important that we advocate like play for everyone. Everyone needs access to play in all its different forms and manifestations, from the cradle to the grave,
But do you feel I feel like I'm playing? Like when I'm making work, I feel like I'm playing. For me, it's kind of like it's a really joyful place to be. I don't know, it's serious, and sometimes with certain curators or institutes. You're not like, yeah, I had a great day, I've been playing in the studio all day. But actually it's a really important part of creativity and making something that then that playfulness seeps through, isn't it, to the final thing.
And I think that, but the thing is that I think there is a kind of odd ideology where people feel that they don't have time to play because of precarity, because of, the economics of society, that, and there's an emphasis on, I think directing people towards the basics. Okay, so for example, with education, it's becoming less and less about play. It's becoming more transactional. So the idea that, you have to acquire skills in order to get employment, in order to get, the basic requirements of being able to eat and have shelter. And for me, that is not a life. Your life comes through these things that I would encompass as kind of play, which is, sharing moments with people, having experiences, discovering things, curiosity, and I think if we have a conversation where, everything is very transactional, it's like you're doing this in order to get this, to get that, then I think that's really, really problematic. So that for me is the sort of politics.
That's the whole Owen's thing of 8 hours labour, 8 hours sleep, 8 hours leisure, divides leisure, and it's the same with the divide between art and science. These kind of like culture divisions stop people thinking that they're having permission to play at work or having permission to work at leisure. Or
absolutely, yeah, and in a very reductive way of assuming how things are going to end up or how they're going to go. So you sort of give yourself this sort of very reductive path in a way, don't you? It becomes this sort of assumed sort of linear way of being. And I think, again, with this project, what we're really trying to do is that this is what space looks like when there are multiple perspectives in the space, when there are multiple trajectories across this space. This is what we recognise is happening in the building all the time. But that sort of play aspect is just you being open and letting something happen and not knowing, what's going to come next from that as well, being very open. Yeah, lovely. That's a lovely question. Yes, yeah. Pass the mic. I can pass the mic over. Brilliant.
Hi. Okay, so I just thought of a really kind of cool way to do it. I know that's a big set of expectations, but... Okay, so my question is, what is a museum? And also, how is a museum? And also, who is a museum?
Off you go, guys.
I mean, can we ask Paul?
Paul, do you want to step in? Could break it up.
I would say it's the people, that make a museum.
You have to speak to the mic.
Oh, sorry. I would say it's definitely the people that make a museum or any other institution. It's the people, the visitors, the people that work here. People.
Quite simple, really, actually, when you think about it. Any other thoughts?
Okay. The question from the questioner might be, because that is a very significant word which has been involved in this establishment from its beginning, where it was called the Museum of Modern Art, with little letters to distinguish it from the American one. Now, the fascinating thing is that every new director, and I've known this space before it was the Museum of Modern Art, so I'm very old, every director changes things. But the title has remained intact through most of them, until I think Andrew Nairn, who changed it. Every director will do something in the foyer, will change the house style of the pamphlets and reading matter. They put their own stamp on it. It's fascinating. It never changes. It always changes. It's never the same. But why was the word museum dropped from this? And I wondered if this had something to do with that.
Where was it then?
mean, there's kind of an anachronism really about like a kind of museum of like the modern, you know, because the notion of the museum is about preserving and archiving. It's about memory and history and saving things in sort of posterity and perpetuity. But like, I think that sort of modernist idea, like we use the word contemporary now, in terms of where you're kind of capturing the now. So there's these things, there's a kind of tension between the history, like the historical and the present. I mean, I won't get into the politics of the naming because I don't know, but I think that going back to the definitions of thinking about kind of, you know, museums, definitely agree with Deb, it is about people fundamentally. But also I think this thing of, you know, the museum has kind of sort of functioned as collective memory. So what do we think is important? What do we think is significant? What do we want to share? What do we want us to bring? What do we want to keep that brings us together? Or what do we want to present and display that brings us together? You know, it sets up an opportunity because it has histories in the, you know, the lineage in a kind of like European Western sense goes back to ancient Rome and that notions of kind of like the archive. I won't go into the history of that, but I think at the moment I'm really interested in other ways and thinking about other cultural traditions of like holding and sharing memory, or, you know, and there are many ways of thinking about that, and I think I sort of welcome the broadening of that kind of conversation. So like other forms that may be about kind of exchange. So it's not necessarily about like the tight preservation of things in perpetuity. We're not allowed to touch them, but actually that something can be held and passed around and it evolves, and what it meant 200 years ago is very different to what it means now, and we can hold those different meanings. So yeah.
I think,
anyway.
I mean, on that thought, it makes me think of, I wrote a proposal, which Kelly has read. But this idea of the museum, you know, it can either be, I had this thought about a museum can either be a graveyard, it can be kind of this massive mausoleum of, you know, things that no longer have life, or it can be full of life, and how then within a contemporary art context do you bring life into the space and the archive, you know, coming to life. And I think that's kind of like, how is the museum, like it can either be dead or alive, and maybe this is what is nice about this exhibition, is bringing this archive to life in a way. Yeah.
One of the problems with museums historically is that they come from often a patriarchal or a colonial view of somebody's idea of what is important. This is the thing we're going to collect, this is the thing that's going to be history.
Exactly.
These are the things that aren't, which is the stuff that is actually quite interesting. And that's one of the things that came up from looking in the archives, that we noticed some terrible discrepancies where there'll be favoritism from a curator, from one artist and another, and stuff that they probably didn't expect to be seen decades later. But it's very subjective. If you're the director of a museum, you have a lot of power, and you have a lot of power over how people perceive what was going on in that world. So although it's like, you mentioned the word we in deciding what goes in the museum, it's kind of not, it's just like a small echelon of people. So that's why this is so important, to like really shake up those ideas and think, what is the past? What really is the past? Not just what those people think the past is. And yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's something that you really did, you know, with Another Present. That is something that questioning, you know, what we accept of how we learn, and something that is just very embedded in us all ultimately because of the kind of education experiences we have. Where certain things, there's a right way to learn, and you know, this kind of like learning from the past is something that's like this key thing that we remind ourselves to continually do, but bringing it more into a different time and space with Another Present, I think, is something that you've really touched upon with your work.
Yeah, and I mean, I do struggle with that, particularly in academia, where you're learning, standing on the shoulders of giants and all of this kind of, what that does is it shuts down what's not on the shoulders. if you know what I mean. And so suddenly you're directed into a space, and if you don't look backwards, then you're just carrying on something that actually might not have come from a great place in the first instance. So it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. I mean, just following on from that. I mean, my understanding was that one of the reasons that changed was because when they decided here that they weren't going to have their own collection, and the museum, and by collection was meant, paintings, drawings, and sculptures, and so on, those kinds of artifacts. But I think one of the things you're showing here is that there is a collection. Nevertheless, as Deborah said, all institutions have collections in the sense that they have memories that are embodied in the current members of it, but are also embodied in the actual physical written records and photographs and so on. And that's why I think it's so important that you're using, and those are now becoming things that are being displayed in the way that drawings and paintings would be in a more traditional exhibition. And I just wondered, was that part of the original brief? Presumably, was it that you were all given, to find some way of using the archive material as part of your work?
I wasn't particularly given a brief. It was very much to sort of think about the space, think about the conversations I've had, and then I was allowed free rein. So, yeah, it was great.
Do we didn't give too many briefs out, did we?
No, I think it's quite an open, invitation. And that, there was the element of the kind of archive, which I got an amazing tour of. What's out there is just but a fraction of the kind of richness that is available. Just to slightly segue back to the kind of previous, I was just thinking about, because we were talking about looking at the past and the present, and I was just reminded me of Ghanaian heritage, and I was thinking about Sankofa, which is this symbol, this Adinkra symbol in Ghanaian culture of, it's kind of like a bird that's kind of looking backwards and forwards. And so I think about that, that's a model of a kind of museum or a space, that notion of kind of just looking backwards and forwards, but also you're in the present as well. But to throw that in.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a sense of using the archive in the brief that we talked about, particularly because it was coming from a sort of a data perspective. So yeah, it was very much about looking backwards. But I ended up looking back in the archive and then also looking back on my own personal life as well. So I kind of was thinking about what is my past and how does that come forwards. And my dad's ashes are sprinkled off of Medley Bridge. It was his favourite fishing place. So this became quite an emotional project for me because that was in my archive, and it felt like a good time to bring it forward and then put it out there and sort of let it go a bit. So that was interesting to work, that having a specific brief about an archive, I dragged it back internally.
I do think it was nice having access to the archive here. I mean, I was already kind of looking at the Black Cultural Archives, and the OI journals are in the Black Cultural Archives. But I just remember spending time here and looking at, there was like the restoration project where they were doing basket weaving. And I also went through some of Yoko Ono's correspondence and documents. And there was a picture of her bum, which got a lot of bad press at the time. I think people were protesting outside like, this is so inappropriate. And so I was like, maybe let's have another bum. So there's a bench with a bum. So that kind of came directly from that. And, she uses a lot of prompts and text in her work as well. So it was just nice being able to go through that documentation, yeah.
And will you just as well, it's kind of nice for you to touch a little bit more on the archive material as well for the women of African and Asian descent as well. Is there anything that's particular from the material that you've brought into the project?
Yes, I mean, I think it's the accessibility of the text and the intimacy of the text. One of the things that stood out in these journals were these deportation notices. So you'd have like pages where it can be anything from like recipes to, you know, very light things, but then they would have these deportation notices so that like this family is getting deported. This is how you can support them, which I thought was really, just really beautiful. And again, like how then do you create this space where it's about creating familiarity, creating safety, creating a space where anyone can belong, and that's why the title is called Mkutano, which means meeting in Swahili, a place for us. So it's like a place for anyone. It's a place for someone to just sit in where you're without demographic, where you don't have to, you can just sit for as long as you want. Yeah.
Thank you. Got some more questions? Yeah. So we can get the...
Just before we move on, just to answer specifically.
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
The conversation, just to answer Alan's question, the story goes that the decision around moving to Modern Art Oxford from the Museum of Modern Art Oxford was actually, I don't want to suggest it wasn't at all ideological and it was a complete whim, but it was Tracy Emin actually, so evidencing the fact that the institution has been consistently shaped really by artists who stood in front of a poster that said the Museum of Modern Art Oxford, cover of the Museum of, and it just said Modern Art Oxford, and that's what led to the rebranding. So, I can't answer many of these questions, but this is one thing that I think actually happened according to the names.
Thank you, Paul. That's great. Thank you.
Hi. Thanks for this conversation. I'm learning a lot from it. My question, I think, maybe is related to the first question that was asked. I'm interested in the space of the encounter, especially if you make objects and installations and performances that don't necessarily immediately have a dialogue afterwards, like a direct dialogue with somebody. And I'm interested in how you collect information from the audience's encounter with these potentially static objects or kind of moments that people encounter in a way that helps you to understand what you're making, better understand what you're making maybe, or gives you information for the future or things like that. You know, do you sit in the gallery and kind of watch, or do you go up to people afterwards and you're like, how is that for you? You know? And I guess, like, how do you do that just like in general, but then also how are you planning on doing that for what you've made here for this space? Again, especially if you don't have the opportunity for just like a direct encounter.
I'm lucky with the creative space. I do have that direct encounter, so I can observe and make notes, and that's where Table Talk has come from. And going forward with the imprints, I'm hoping to do something with that later. It's like everyone's been saying, it feels like this isn't quite finished. There's going to be something evolving from what happens in the next couple of months.
It's a really great question. Thanks, Kelly. I think it happens in multiple ways. I mean, there are obviously those moments where you're sort of present and observing, and even with sort of more static shows, I'm just showing a video or something, I like to come back and just watch. It's easy when you're not in the work, actually. It's a bit difficult when you are. But also, I think something I would recognise is also just, we're talking about museums and the idea that people are museums. Often just talking to invigilators, talking to curators who've been living with the work as well, and like just recognising them as documenters or recorders of encounters, and they're often just really amazing stories of how people have responded or questions that people have asked. So that's another, those conversations I really value with the people, institutional people that have spent time with the work, and then sometimes you get people that do contact you as well to tell you. Yeah.
I don't know, it's going to partly rely on the gallery, but Instagram, Julie Freeman _artist, if you want a selfie with your work, give me your feedback. But just watching people was a privilege today, particularly this lady in the corner, who's like my #1 audience member, who was right up against the piece of work and just like really getting it. So that even witnessing one person having an amazing experience with your work is sort of, it's almost enough. You know, obviously you want loads of people, but those moments are just, thanks for that, you know, it was really nice. But yes,
they're very huggable, aren't they? I think we've found we're all sort of kind of drawn to just giving Julie's work a cuddle and kind of getting quite close with it straight away. So it'll be interesting to see. Absolutely. Yeah. Valerie, how about you?
Yeah, I think not much to add to what has already been said. But I do like, I like the idea of the audience being able to leave something behind. And I think that's why it was important for me to have like the book there. Like, you know, you go into someone's, well, not anymore, but people used to have guest books in their houses, I think. And yeah, I like the idea that, you know, people, just their presence will be left there maybe in a more, I don't know, spiritual way, in a way, like people sitting there and occupying the space. And I know there have been talks about, you know, staff members being able to come with their laptops and just working within the space. So I think that's a nice way to kind of test out this idea of like having a gallery exhibition that's also a workable space. And it will be great to get feedback from everyone about how it's been, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So we invite you all to come with your laptops the next couple of weeks and spend time. We're definitely planning on working in the gallery spaces this summer. Looking forward to seeing what that experience feels like. Do we have time for one more question? Or we're just over. What do we think? One more? Yeah, I think I saw another hand. Is that right? Yeah.
Thanks, it's been really, really interesting. I suppose, and it's quite a good summary question, but I completely understand where the encounters part of this comes from. But I'm interested to hear what you think the boundary part of this exhibition is.
I can start, because for me, maybe because of my experience in my life, a boundary for me has always been a border. And whether that is a literal borderline with, you know, within countries, I've lived Tanzania, South Africa, I've mostly been a foreigner throughout my life. So for me, a boundary is always a border. And it's about how do you cross that border? How do you become familiar as a foreigner in a way? And I think that's what the encounter then helps the boundary dissolve in a way. But yeah, that's how I interpreted the boundary part of it. Yeah.
I think for me, the boundary of, I come from quite a working class background, so I guess the boundary of even being in a gallery and being able to touch the work, it felt like a sort of that kind of boundary of feeling like it's okay to be there and to do your stuff. And then also naturally, I think the physical boundary between sound, not having a physical presence, and then giving sound a physical presence. So that sort of tactile boundary as well.
I don't really have anything to add. I think that, I'd agree with both of those answers. Yeah, definitely. Dan?
I'm a bit the same as Julie, working class background, and I can remember being stood outside the back doors when I was 14, thinking, can I cross that threshold? And now I'm here, I want to open that up to everybody. You know, from across the bridge and everything, it's important to get everybody in and give everybody that opportunity to shine.
From across the bridge?
Yeah, Oxford's full of like hidden boundaries. There's lots of them. And one of them is being over Magdalen Bridge. There's Oxford City, and then there's the rest of it.
Right. I've been taking pictures of the bridges. I've got that bridges have become that's interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. Wonderful. Yeah. All right.
I want to find out more.
Yeah. Start talking bridges.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for coming this evening. Our event, our kind of public view for the whole programme now has officially started, but it's been really wonderful to really open the show with this rich conversation. And I don't think I can say thank you enough really for what an absolute pleasure it's been to work with you all and the way that you've responded to this idea and that we're working with us. So Valerie, Julie, Harold and Deborah, thank you all so much for the work that you've made and for this wonderful conversation this evening. Thank you.